What occurred in the Western Pacific between April 9th and April 12th represents the most significant demonstration of autonomous naval capability in military history, and it changes everything about how we understand naval warfare, American Pacific dominance, and the strategic balance that has maintained relative stability in East Asia for 70 years. At 0400 hours on April 9th, the People's Liberation Army Navy launched approximately 3,000 autonomous surface and subsurface drones from positions throughout the South China Sea and East China Sea in a coordinated exercise that effectively paralyzed freedom of movement for conventional naval forces across an area of 2.1 million square kilometers. By April 11th, swarms of these drones had established operational presence within 12 nautical miles of Tokyo Bay, forcing the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force into defensive posture and demonstrating a capability that American naval planners had assessed would not be operationally viable until 2030 at the earliest. I am going to take you inside every dimension of this development. What technology enables 3,000 autonomous platforms to operate in coordinated fashion across millions of square kilometers? What does this mean for aircraft carrier strike groups that have been the foundation of American Pacific power since 1945? And what does the Western Pacific look like when the country that controls its littoral waters can deploy thousands of expendable platforms that render conventional naval superiority obsolete? There are no reassuring answers tonight. 3 questions will structure everything that follows. By the end of this analysis, you will understand why the naval balance of power just shifted in a way that has no precedent since the aircraft carrier displaced the battleship in 1942, and why every assumption about American ability to project power in the Pacific no longer holds. Let me start with the technical specifications of what was actually deployed, because the mainstream coverage has focused on the drama of the exercise while missing the revolutionary implications of the capability being demonstrated. The drones deployed fall into 3 categories, and understanding each category reveals why this represents a qualitative shift rather than incremental improvement. First category, Type 076 surface autonomous vessels, approximately 1,000 units deployed. These are unmanned surface vehicles measuring 8 meters in length, displacing 3 tons, capable of 42-knot maximum speed with operational range of 800 nautical miles. Each unit carries sensor packages including radar, electro-optical tracking, and communications relay capability. Second category, Type 081 subsurface autonomous vehicles, approximately 1,500 units. These operate at depths between 10 and 150 meters, measure 4 meters in length, carry acoustic sensors and magnetic anomaly detection equipment with endurance of 72 hours at cruising speed of 12 knots. The critical innovation here is networked operation, where individual units share sensor data to create composite underwater picture across massive areas. Third category, Type 084 loitering munitions, approximately 500 units. These are the actual weapons in the system. Each measures 2.4 meters, carries a 40-kilogram high explosive warhead, and can loiter for 6 hours before either striking targets or returning to recovery vessels. They use a combination of autonomous target recognition and remote authorization for final attack decisions. The numbers tell you the scale. 3,000 platforms operating simultaneously across 2 million square kilometers of ocean. To put that in perspective, the entire United States Navy operates approximately 290 ships total globally. China just deployed 10 times that number of platforms in a single exercise in a single theater. But the quantity is less significant than the coordination capability. These 3,000 platforms are not operating independently. They are networked through a combination of satellite communications, mesh networking between units, and artificial intelligence coordination that allows them to function as distributed sensor and strike network rather than individual platforms. Here is what that means practically. A subsurface drone detects an acoustic signature consistent with submarine transit. It shares that data with nearby surface drones, which adjust position to optimize tracking. If the contact is classified as hostile, loitering munitions in the area receive targeting data and move to intercept positions. The entire sequence occurs autonomously with human operators monitoring rather than controlling. The exercise demonstrated that this system can track and maintain firing solutions on surface vessels, submarines, and aircraft simultaneously across areas larger than the Mediterranean Sea. Chinese state media released footage showing the drone network maintaining track on simulated targets, including aircraft carrier signatures, submarine acoustic profiles, and surface combatant formations. The cost differential is where you see why this represents strategic transformation rather than tactical innovation. Each Type 076 surface drone cost approximately $400,000 to produce at scale. Each subsurface unit costs $600,000. Each loitering munition costs $200,000. The total cost for the 3,000 platforms deployed in this exercise is approximately $1.5 billion. Compare that to a single American aircraft carrier strike group. The carrier itself costs $13 billion. The escort vessels add another $8 billion. The aircraft wing adds $3 billion. A single carrier strike group represents $24 billion in assets. China just demonstrated capability to threaten that strike group with platforms costing 6% as much. The mathematics of attrition warfare become impossible for conventional forces. If these drones achieve even a 5% hit rate against defended naval targets, China can produce and deploy them at a rate that overwhelms any defensive response. You cannot build aircraft carriers faster than China can build drones. You cannot train carrier crews faster than China can manufacture autonomous systems. The economic equation that has favored American naval dominance since World War II just reversed. This brings me to the question everyone is asking. Why did the American 7th Fleet reposition south during this exercise, and what does that repositioning reveal about capability and intention? Here's what you need to understand. The USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group, which had been operating in the Philippine Sea approximately 400 kilometers east of Taiwan, withdrew to positions south of Luzon Island in the Philippines on April 10th. Official statements describe this as routine repositioning unrelated to Chinese exercises. That explanation is not credible. Carrier strike groups do not abandon operating areas during potential adversary exercises unless there is genuine concern about survivability. The repositioning occurred 36 hours after Chinese drone deployment began, which means American commanders assessed the threat environment and concluded that maintaining position created unacceptable risk. Let me explain why that assessment was rational. A carrier strike group's defensive capability against aerial threats is formidable. The Aegis combat system can track and engage hundreds of targets simultaneously. Standard missiles can intercept supersonic anti-ship missiles. Close-in weapon systems provide terminal defense. Against conventional aerial attack, a carrier strike group is extraordinarily survivable. But against 3,000 networked autonomous platforms operating in coordinated fashion, the defensive mathematics break down. The combat system can track them. It can even engage significant numbers simultaneously. But it cannot engage all of them before running out of interceptor missiles, and once the magazine is empty, the strike group becomes defensively impotent. A single carrier strike group carries approximately 400 standard missiles across all escort vessels. If we assume 90% intercept rate, which is optimistic against maneuvering targets, the group can defeat 360 incoming threats before defensive capability is exhausted. If China is operating 3,000 platforms and even a fraction are configured for anti-ship attack, the mathematics favor overwhelming the defense through saturation. The American commanders understood this. They recognized that remaining in the exercise area meant accepting risk of a scenario where Chinese forces could demonstrate the ability to exhaust defensive capability without actually attacking, which would be a strategic humiliation even if no shots were fired. The withdrawal was a tactical acknowledgement of strategic reality. But the withdrawal itself sends a signal that cannot be unnoticed by every American ally in the Pacific. When a carrier strike group repositions away from potential threat rather than maintaining presence during adversary exercises, it communicates that American military dominance is no longer assured. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines all processed what it means when American naval power yields operational space to Chinese capabilities. The public statements about routine repositioning make the signal worse rather than better because they suggest that American leadership believes allies will accept transparent falsehoods rather than demand honest assessment of changing strategic realities. That kind of condescension undermines alliance cohesion more effectively than acknowledging capability gaps and working cooperatively to address them. From the Chinese perspective, this exercise accomplished multiple objectives simultaneously. It demonstrated technological capability that American intelligence had underestimated. It showed operational proficiency in coordinating complex autonomous systems. It revealed American vulnerability to saturation attack. And it did all of this without firing a shot or creating a crisis that would demand immediate response. This is strategic communication through capability demonstration. China is telling America and American allies that the Western Pacific is no longer an American lake, that conventional naval superiority is negated by autonomous systems that can be produced at scale, and that Taiwan scenarios need to be recalculated based on new operational realities. Let me take you through the historical pattern, because this is not the first time that disruptive naval technology has overturned established strategic balances, and understanding the pattern helps predict what comes next. In 1941, battleships were the measure of naval power. The side with more battleships and bigger guns controlled the seas. Japan demonstrated at Pearl Harbor, and Britain demonstrated against the Bismarck that aircraft carriers had made battleships obsolete. The ship that could strike from 300 kilometers was superior to the ship that could only strike from 30 kilometers regardless of armor or firepower. The battleship admirals resisted this conclusion. They argued that battleships remained relevant, that carriers were vulnerable to surface action, that the future belonged to balanced fleets combining both capabilities. By 1945, every major navy had stopped building battleships and converted production to carriers. The strategic revolution was complete in 4 years. We are watching the same pattern emerge with autonomous systems and conventional crewed vessels. The platform that can deploy thousands of expendable units is superior to the platform that depends on expensive crewed vessels, regardless of individual vessel capability. The cost-exchange ratio makes conventional naval power obsolete the same way aircraft made battleships obsolete. The carrier admirals are resisting this conclusion the same way battleship admirals resisted in 1942. They argue that autonomous systems are vulnerable to electronic warfare, that human decision-making remains essential, that the future belongs to balanced forces. These arguments might slow the transition, but they will not prevent it, because the economic mathematics are inexorable. China can build autonomous platforms at a rate that America cannot match while maintaining conventional fleet structure. Every dollar America spends on a new destroyer is a dollar not spent on autonomous systems development. Every year, America maintains 10 carrier strike groups is a year China accelerates production of systems designed to defeat those carriers. The procurement inertia that keeps America building 20th century platforms is the same inertia that kept battleship construction going until 1943, despite Pearl Harbor demonstrating their obsolescence. The historical parallel extends to alliance dynamics. When Britain's naval supremacy eroded in the early 20th century, countries that had relied on British protection started building their own navies or seeking alternative security arrangements. Japan built a world-class fleet. Germany challenged British dominance. Regional powers recognized that British protection was no longer reliable. We are entering the same dynamic in the Pacific. When American naval dominance erodes, countries that have relied on American protection will seek alternatives. Japan will accelerate autonomous systems development and possibly nuclear weapons acquisition. South Korea will hedge by improving relations with China. Taiwan will calculate whether American security guarantees remain credible when American carriers withdraw during Chinese exercises. The alliance structure that has maintained stability in the Pacific since 1951 rested on assured American naval superiority. When that superiority becomes questionable, the alliance structure becomes unstable. This is not a prediction. This is a pattern that has repeated throughout modern history whenever naval balances shift. Now let me walk through the scenario pathways for how this situation develops over the next 12 to 36 months, because there are multiple trajectories and understanding each helps prepare for what follows. Scenario 1, arms race in autonomous systems. America recognizes the strategic shift, redirects naval procurement toward autonomous platforms, and attempts to match Chinese production capacity. This is the most expensive scenario, requiring hundreds of billions in additional defense spending while retiring conventional assets before planned service life ends. It stabilizes the military balance eventually, but at enormous fiscal cost during a period when American debt sustainability is already questionable. And that's more the carbon tax. Scenario 2, defensive adaptation. America accepts that offensive power projection in the Western Pacific is no longer viable, shifts strategy to defensive perimeter focused on second island chain, and relies on long-range strike from submarines and bombers rather than carrier presence. This reduces costs but cedes operational space to China and signals to allies that forward defense is abandoned. Scenario 3, technological breakthrough. America develops counter-drone capability through directed energy weapons, electronic warfare, or artificial intelligence superiority that negates Chinese numerical advantage. This is the preferred scenario in American defense planning, but represents optimistic assessment of technological development timelines and operational effectiveness against adaptive opponents. Scenario 4, political accommodation. America recognizes that contesting Chinese naval dominance in littoral waters adjacent to mainland China is neither sustainable nor necessary, negotiates new status quo that acknowledges Chinese operational control of first island chain in exchange for guaranteed freedom of navigation and Taiwanese autonomy. This is strategically rational but politically impossible in current environment. I assess scenario 2 as most likely over the next 24 months. Probability 55%. There in Creek War Stuarts. America will not have the political will or fiscal capacity for full arms race in autonomous systems. Technological breakthrough is possible, but not probable on timelines that matter strategically. Political accommodation requires leadership willing to accept diminished hegemony, which neither political party currently offers. The critical variable is Taiwan. If China assesses that American naval power can no longer credibly defend Taiwan, the calculus on reunification timing changes. The period of maximum danger is the next 18 to 36 months while American strategy adapts and before defensive perimeter is fully established. During that window, China might conclude that operational conditions favor action. American strategic planners understand this, which is why you are seeing accelerated weapons transfers to Taiwan and enhanced coordination with Japan and South Korea. These are preparations for Scenario 2, establishing defensive capabilities that do not depend on American carrier presence in Taiwan Strait. The question is whether these preparations occur fast enough to maintain deterrence during the transition period. Based on procurement timelines and training requirements, that seems optimistic. There is a window of vulnerability, and adversaries who understand military history recognize that windows of vulnerability are when decisive action becomes attractive. Here's what this means going forward. The Western Pacific strategic balance that has maintained relative stability since the Korean War is breaking down. A new balance is emerging based on Chinese ability to deny access to waters adjacent to their territory through autonomous systems that render conventional naval power projection prohibitively risky. American military presence in the Pacific will transition from forward deployment to offshore presence. Bases in Japan, South Korea, and Guam will remain, but carrier strike groups will operate from greater distances and with reduced freedom of movement. The assumption that America can surge naval power to any crisis in the Western Pacific within 72 hours no longer holds. Taiwan's security environment will deteriorate significantly. The implicit American commitment to defend Taiwan rested on ability to rapidly deploy overwhelming naval power. When that ability becomes questionable, deterrence weakens. Taiwan will need to develop independent defensive capability sufficient to impose costs that make reunification by force unattractive even without guaranteed American intervention. Regional alliance structures will undergo profound stress. Japan and South Korea will question whether American security guarantees remain credible when American naval forces withdraw from areas where allies face threats. This questioning might produce either stronger independent defense capabilities or accommodation with China. Both outcomes reduce American influence. The global implications extend beyond the Pacific. If Chinese autonomous systems negate American naval power in one theater, other adversaries will develop similar capabilities for their theaters. Russia will deploy drone networks in the Black Sea and Baltic. Iran will blanket the Persian Gulf. The era of American ability to project naval power globally with impunity is ending. This is not the outcome American policy has worked toward for 8 decades. But it is the outcome that technological development and strategic choices have produced. When you maintain expensive conventional forces while adversaries develop asymmetric capabilities, the cost-exchange ratio eventually favors the adversary. When you spread forces globally while adversaries concentrate in regional theaters, the local balance favors concentration. These are predictable consequences of identifiable choices. I might be wrong about specific timelines. The transition might be faster or slower than I project, but the technological trajectory is clear. Autonomous systems with artificial intelligence coordination represent the same kind of disruptive innovation that aircraft carriers represented in 1941. So, Krister and Tordids. The Navy that adapts first to this reality will dominate the next era of naval warfare. China adapted first. They recognized earlier than American planners that autonomous systems produced at scale would overwhelm expensive crewed vessels. They invested accordingly. They demonstrated operational capability. They changed the strategic equation. The question now is how America responds. Does America attempt to match Chinese autonomous systems production, accepting the fiscal costs? Does America adapt strategy to acknowledge Chinese regional dominance? Does America pursue technological breakthroughs that restore conventional advantages? Or does America continue procuring 20th century platforms while hoping the strategic shift is not as significant as it appears? This is not prophecy. This is structural analysis applied to demonstrated capability and observable procurement decisions. The technology exists, the capability has been demonstrated. The strategic implications are calculable. What remains uncertain is whether American strategic culture can adapt fast enough to manage this transition effectively. What you do with this analysis is your choice. Question it. Test it against evidence. Watch what happens over the next 6 months as these capabilities are refined and potentially deployed operationally. The truth reveals itself through events, and we will analyze those events together as they unfold. We are watching a technological revolution in naval warfare that will be studied in military academies for the next century. 3,000 autonomous platforms operating in coordinated fashion across 2 million square kilometers is not an exercise. It is a demonstration that the rules of naval warfare have changed, and the Navy that wrote those rules for the last 80 years is no longer the Navy that controls how they evolve. The question is not whether this shift occurs. The question is how quickly it accelerates and whether the transition happens through managed adaptation or crisis-driven upheaval. That is the analysis we will continue to develop together as this historic transformation unfolds.